The restaurant buzzed with celebration. Crystal glasses clinked as waiters served champagne to elegantly dressed guests. In the center of it all, Dr. Elena Reyes and her husband Marcus embraced, accepting congratulations on their 10th wedding anniversary. Elena radiated in her emerald dress, her smile never faltering as she graciously thanked each well-wisher. Yet something in her eyes, a certain distance, a carefully maintained composure, suggested that beneath the perfect surface, something wasn't quite right. Only her sister Camilla noticed, catching Elena's gaze across the room with a questioning look. Elena gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not now. Not here. Just 3 days earlier, while searching for Marcus's health insurance card, Elena had found it. A worn photograph of a young woman carefully tucked behind Marcus's driver's license. The woman was beautiful, with dark curls and eyes that seemed to hold both joy and sorrow, a stranger's face that had triggered an avalanche of questions. Who was she? Why did Marcus keep her photo hidden? And most troubling, why had her husband of 10 years never mentioned her? What puzzled those closest to Elena wasn't just the discovery itself, but her reaction. There had been no confrontation, no emotional breakdown. Instead, Elena, the methodical, brilliant pediatric surgeon known for her steady hands in the operating room, had simply slipped the photo back exactly as she found it. Then she'd proceeded with planning their anniversary party as if nothing had changed. Only Camilla knew the truth, that behind Eleanor's composed smile lay a mind already formulating a plan. Because Dr. Elena Reyes had made a career of solving complex problems under pressure, and she wasn't about to stop now. Not when it came to uncovering the truth that her husband had kept hidden for a decade. 5 years earlier, the medical journal, Frontiers in Pediatric Medicine, had featured Elena on its cover, highlighting her revolutionary technique for repairing congenital heart defects in newborns. The accompanying article described her as brilliantly innovative yet remarkably humble, noting how she'd declined offers from prestigious hospitals in favor of staying at Chicago Memorial, where she led a team dedicated to treating children from underserved communities. What the article didn't capture was the life she'd built with Marcus beyond the hospital walls. Their home in the historic Ravenswood neighborhood was a carefully restored Victorian, its walls lined with bookshelves and artwork collected during their travels. On Sunday mornings, they would take turns making breakfast. Marcus's specialty was chilaquiles, inspired by his Mexican grandmother's recipe, while Elena mastered French toast with homemade cinnamon bread. Their ritual included coffee on the wraparound porch, even in winter, bundled in blankets as they planned their week ahead. "We should visit Barcelona next spring," Marcus had suggested just last month, his fingers intertwined with hers. "You've been talking about Gaudi's architecture since we met." Elena had smiled, squeezing his hand. "You're always planning our next adventure." "Someone has to balance your obsessive scheduling," he teased, kissing her knuckles. "The world's most organized surgeon needs a little spontaneity." Their friends often joked that they'd achieved the impossible, a dual-career marriage where both partners thrived professionally without sacrificing their relationship. While Elena saved children's lives, Marcus had built Horizon Technologies, a company developing educational software for students with learning disabilities. His passion had grown from his own childhood struggles with dyslexia, transforming frustration into innovation that now helped thousands of children. They'd met at a hospital fundraiser where Marcus was demonstrating his software to potential donors. Elena, then a rising star in the surgical department, had stopped at his booth, curious about the program that was generating excitement among the pediatric neurologists. "You're not giving me the standard pitch," she'd observed after listening to his detailed explanation of the software's adaptive algorithms. Marcus had laughed. "I figured the woman who just published research on microsurgical techniques might appreciate the technical details." "You know who I am?" she'd asked, surprised. "I make it my business to research brilliant people," he'd replied with the confident smile that would eventually win her heart, especially when they might help me improve my work. Their courtship had been swift but deliberate, dinners discussing everything from neural pathways to favorite poets, weekend hikes where they discovered shared dreams of family and purpose. 6 months later, Marcus proposed on the shore of Lake Michigan at sunrise, having learned that Elena found traditional romantic gestures statistically predictable. "I thought surgeons were early risers," he'd teased when she'd arrived looking sleepy, following his mysterious text message. Then he'd presented her with a vintage medical text on cardiovascular surgery from 1923, which he'd hollowed out to hold. The ring, a sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. "I wanted to propose in a way that honors who you are," he'd said, as dawn painted the sky pink behind him. "Someone who values knowledge, history, and saving lives more than diamonds or candlelight dinners." For years, their marriage had seemed unshakable. They weathered the disappointment of unsuccessful fertility treatments with shared grief that ultimately strengthened their bond. They adapted when Marcus's company expanded, requiring frequent travel to education conferences. Elena's surgical schedule often meant missed anniversaries, celebrated belatedly, but no less joyfully. They'd built a life of mutual respect and unwavering support, or so Elena had believed until the photograph. The morning after their anniversary celebration, Elena sat in her home office reviewing patient files. Marcus had left early for a meeting with investors, kissing her goodbye with the same affection he'd always shown. Nothing in his behavior suggested a man harboring secrets, which made the hidden photograph all the more perplexing. Elena closed her laptop and reached for the photo. She'd secretly scanned and printed. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, the picture taken perhaps 15 years ago, based on the slightly faded color quality and the woman's style. There was something in her smile, a particular way her eyes crinkled at the corners, that struck Elena as familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. Elena's analytical mind, honed by years of diagnosing complex medical conditions, began cataloging what she knew. The photo was well worn, suggesting Marcus had kept it for years, handling it frequently. He'd placed it behind his driver's license, not hidden among old memorabilia, but carried daily in his wallet. This wasn't a casual acquaintance or forgotten relationship. This woman held significance. Her phone chimed with a text from Camilla. "Have you asked him yet?" Elena replied, "Not yet. Need more information first." "Classic, Elena," came the response. "Not everyone approaches marriage like a research project." But that wasn't fair, Elena thought. Medicine had taught her that reactions based on incomplete information often led to catastrophic outcomes. Confronting Marcus with nothing but assumptions and accusations would be like performing surgery without a proper diagnosis. She reviewed what she knew about Marcus's past. They'd shared their histories, or so she thought. His childhood in San Diego with parents who'd immigrated from Mexico, his struggles with dyslexia, college at Stanford, the tech startup that failed before Horizon succeeded. He'd told her about significant ex-girlfriends, including Daniela, whom he'd nearly proposed to before realizing they wanted different futures. There had been no mention of a dark-haired woman who warranted carrying her photograph for a decade of marriage. Elena's thoughts were interrupted by a call from the hospital. 7-month-old patient with a critical congenital heart defect. Emergency surgery required. Personal concerns would have to wait. Hours later, Elena stood at the surgical sink, methodically scrubbing her hands after successfully repairing the infant's tiny heart. The focused precision required for such delicate work had temporarily pushed aside thoughts of the photograph, but as the immediate pressure of surgery receded, her mind returned to the mystery. Her colleague, Dr. James Wong, joined her at the sink. "Remarkable work as usual, Elena. That baby wouldn't have made it without you." The team did excellent work. She deflected automatically. James shook his head. Ever the humble one? How was the anniversary party? 10 years is impressive these days. It was lovely, Elena replied, maintaining the practiced smile she'd perfected over the past few days. Marcus surprised me with a weekend in Napa next month. You two make it look easy, James commented. My second marriage is already showing cracks, and we're only at year 3. Elena thought about the countless patients she'd treated whose parents presented perfect facades while their marriages crumbled behind closed doors. Appearances meant nothing. She knew this professionally. Yet, personally, she'd believed her marriage was the exception, built on honesty and transparency. No marriage is easy, she said finally. We just don't advertise the difficult parts. James nodded thoughtfully. The hospital counselor told me something similar during my divorce. Said even the strongest relationships have secrets or unspoken truths. His words lingered with Elena as she changed out of her scrubs. Unspoken truths. Was that what the photograph represented? Not necessarily betrayal, but simply parts of Marcus he'd kept to himself. Driving home, Elena's scientific mind formulated a hypothesis. The woman was connected to Marcus's past in a way he found too painful to share. The photograph wasn't evidence of present infidelity, but of past significance he couldn't relinquish. But another voice, not the surgeon but the wife, whispered a simpler truth. After 10 years of marriage, there shouldn't be mysterious women in her husband's wallet. Whatever the explanation, the existence of the photograph represented a failure of candor that had always been the cornerstone of their relationship. As Elena pulled into their driveway, she noticed a package on the porch. A delivery from Marcus's company. Inside would be the new educational tablets being sent to their beta testing schools. She brought it inside, planning to leave it in his home office. Marcus's workspace was meticulously organized, reflecting the compensatory habits he'd developed to manage his dyslexia. Elena placed the package on his desk, then paused, her attention caught by a framed photo she'd seen hundreds of times, Marcus at his college graduation with his parents. She picked it up, studying his mother's face with new attention. The same crinkle around the eyes when she smiled. The same curve of the jawline. Elena set down the frame, a new possibility taking shape in her mind. Perhaps the mystery wasn't about another woman at all, but about family. A sister, a cousin, someone connected to Marcus by blood rather than romance. It was time to find out. The idea that the mysterious woman might be family rather than a lover shifted Elena's perspective considerably, but it raised new questions. Why would Marcus keep a family member secret? Elena knew his parents, had met his cousins at their wedding, video-called with his aunt in Mexico City every Christmas. He'd never mentioned a sister or close female relative who matched the woman in the photograph. That evening, Marcus returned home later than usual, bringing takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, a peace offering for his absence during dinner. The familiar routine of setting out plates and pouring wine gave Elena a moment to observe him. Did he seem different now that she was looking for signs of secrecy, or was she projecting suspicion onto ordinary fatigue? "How was your day?" he asked, serving her the mango curry she always ordered. "Any miracle surgeries?" "A 7-month-old with hypoplastic left heart syndrome," she replied. "Touch and go, but he's stabilized after surgery." Marcus reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "That's why you're the best. Those kids are lucky to have you." His touch was warm, familiar. The same hands that had held hers through failed pregnancy tests and celebrated professional victories. Elena studied his face, searching for signs of deception, but finding only the same open expression she'd trusted for a decade. "Your package arrived," she mentioned casually. "I put it in your office." "Thanks. The new tablets for the dyslexia study. We're expanding to 5 more schools next month." Elena nodded, remembering how passionately he'd fought for funding to reach underserved districts. "I was looking at our wedding album the other day," she said, testing the waters. "It's strange how some faces become so familiar while others fade from memory." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Nostalgic lately. 10 years makes you reflective." She took a sip of wine. "I was thinking about your side of the family. There were relatives at our wedding I haven't seen since. Mostly distant cousins," he shrugged. "My family was never as close-knit as yours." The conversation drifted to other topics: an upcoming benefit for the hospital, plans for their Napa trip, but Elena noted how smoothly he'd redirected away from family discussions. Another data point, inconclusive but noteworthy. After dinner, while Marcus showered, Elena made a decision. She'd been trained to trust empirical evidence over conjecture. She needed more information before approaching Marcus, and she knew where to start. The next morning, Eleanor called in a favor from Sophia, her college roommate who now worked as a genealogical researcher. "I'm trying to fill in some blanks in Marcus's family tree as an anniversary surprise," she explained, the lie feeling foreign on her tongue, "particularly any female relatives around his age or slightly older." "Family trees are my love language," Sophia laughed. "Send me what you know, and I'll see what I can find." Elena hesitated before her next move. In 15 years of friendship and 10 years of marriage, she'd never violated Marcus's privacy, but the photograph had already disrupted the equilibrium of trust between them. She entered his office again, this time with purpose rather than coincidence. Marcus kept important documents in a fireproof safe behind his desk: birth certificate, passports, property deeds. Elena knew the combination. They'd established long ago that such information shouldn't be limited to one spouse in case of emergencies. Still, opening the safe without him felt like crossing a boundary. Inside, she found the expected folders, neatly labeled property, identification, insurance. But there was another, simply marked personal. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The contents were unexpected. Newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Letters written in Spanish that Eleanor's limited knowledge couldn't fully decipher. And photographs, several showing the same woman from Marcus's wallet at different ages. In one, she stood beside a young boy Eleanor recognized as Marcus, perhaps 8 years old, his arm around her waist. They were laughing in front of a Christmas tree. Elena's confusion deepened. This was clearly someone significant from his childhood. But why hide such memories? Why never mention this woman who appeared to be family? A final photograph provided another clue. The woman, older now, in a hospital bed. Marcus, barely recognizable with grief, etched on his much younger face, holding her hand. Written on the back in Spanish, "Isabella's last day. May she find peace." Elena carefully returned everything to the safe, her mind racing. Isabella, a name Marcus had never mentioned in 10 years together. Someone who had died, someone whose loss had clearly devastated him. A sister? A cousin raised like a sister? That afternoon, Elena made an unprecedented decision to cancel her afternoon clinic. Instead, she drove to visit Marcus's parents, Roberto, and Lucia, who had retired to a suburb 40 minutes outside Chicago. She'd always had a warm relationship with them, particularly Lucia, who had taught Elena to cook traditional Mexican dishes and treated her like the daughter she'd never had. Thought struck Elena with new significance. The daughter she'd never had. Lucia welcomed her with surprise and delight. "Elena, what a wonderful surprise! Roberto is at his bowling league, but come in, come in." Elena accepted tea in the sunlit kitchen, filled with houseplants and family. Photos. She'd been in this room countless times, but now found herself scanning the photographs with new awareness. There were many of Marcus at various ages, some including Elena, others with Roberto and Lucia, none with the woman from the wallet. "I hope everything is okay," Lucia asked, noticing Elena's distraction. "Everything's fine," Elena assured her. "Actually, I was hoping to ask you something about Marcus's childhood." Lucia smiled encouragingly. "Were there other children in your family? Cousins Marcus was particularly close to growing up?" Something flickered across Lucia's face. Not quite alarm, but a momentary tension. "A few cousins visited from Mexico during summers. Why do you ask?" Elena took a breath, then decided direct honesty was necessary. "I found a photograph in Marcus's wallet. A young woman with dark, curly hair, similar features to your family. He's never mentioned her, but she seems important to him." Lucia set down her teacup with a slight clatter. For a long moment she was silent, her eyes fixed on some middle distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "You found Isabella." The name confirmed what Elena had seen on the photograph. "Who is she, Lucia?" Lucia's eyes met Elena's, filled with a complex mixture of sorrow and concern. "That is Marcus's story to tell, my dear. I cannot take that from him." "But there is a story," Elena pressed gently. Lucia nodded slowly. "One that shaped him more than perhaps he realizes. One that still hurts." She reached across the table, taking Elena's hand. "You are a good wife, Elena. A good person. When you ask him, be gentle. Some wounds never fully heal, only scar over." Elena, left with more questions than answers, but one certainty had emerged. Whatever secret Marcus carried about Isabella had been painful enough that his mother still protected it decades later. This wasn't about infidelity or deception, it was about trauma. That evening, Elena found herself unable to focus on her medical journals or the latest surgical protocol updates. Her mind kept returning to the name Isabella, and the shadow she seemed to cast over Marcus's past. She tried to reconcile her husband, open, affectionate, stable, with the idea that he had compartmentalized such a significant part of his history. When Marcus texted that he'd be working late, Eleanor felt a twinge of relief. She needed time to process, to decide how to approach him. The surgeon in her wanted to diagnose before treating. The wife wanted understanding before confrontation. Elena's phone pinged with an email from Sophia. "Found some interesting records. Call me when you can." Stepping onto the back porch for privacy, Elena dialed her friend. "So I did some digging into the Reyes family," Sophia began, the excitement of discovery evident in her voice, "and I found something unusual in their immigration records from Mexico. When Roberto and Lucia came to the United States in 1985, they listed 2 children, Marcus, age 3, and Isabella, age 16. Elena's breath caught. Isabella was his sister. The age difference explained why she might have seemed more like an aunt or cousin in Marcus's childhood memories. Yes, but here's where it gets complicated. I found death records for an Isabella Reyes in San Diego 2003. She would have been about 34 then. Cause of death listed as complications from chronic condition. The timeline aligned with the hospital photograph. Marcus would have been in his early 20s, just finishing college. Did you find anything else about her? Medical records are private, of course, but I found newspaper mentions of an Isabella Reyes who advocated for mental health services in the Latino community in San Diego around 2002. Several articles quote her discussing her own struggles with bipolar disorder, mental illness. The pieces were beginning to align, the secrecy, the pain, the evident loss. Elena thanked Sophia and ended the call, sitting alone in the gathering dusk as she processed this new information. Marcus had an older sister who had struggled with mental illness and died young. A sister he had never once mentioned in their decade of marriage. When Marcus finally came home, Elena was working in the living room, medical journals spread across the coffee table, a deliberate attempt at normalcy. He looked tired but smiled. When he saw her, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "Sorry I'm late. The investor meeting ran long. Then I had to fix some code issues with the new release." "Did you eat?" she asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Grabbed something at the office." He loosened his tie, collapsing onto the sofa beside her. "You know what I was thinking about today? That trip we took to Sedona right after we got engaged. Remember that ridiculous pink Jeep tour where you kept uncorrecting the guide about the geological formations?" Eleanor smiled despite herself. He was telling people that hoodoos were formed by alien activity. "You couldn't help yourself." "Excuse me, but those are actually the result of differential erosion rates in sedimentary rock." His impression of her was spot on, down to the slight hand gesture she used when explaining technical concepts. For a moment, they were just Elena and Marcus again, the couple who could finish each other's sentences and laugh about shared memories. The photograph and Isabella seemed distant, almost imaginary. But as Marcus excused himself to shower, Elena noticed him carefully place his wallet on the nightstand, the same wallet that held the secret that now stood between them. The casual domesticity of their evening suddenly felt like an elaborate performance, a play where both actors had memorized different scripts. The next day at the hospital, Elena found herself distracted during rounds. The chief of surgery, Dr. Harriet Levinson, pulled her aside afterward. "You seem off today, Elena. Not like you to miss that murmur in the Phillips baby." Elena apologized, embarrassed. "Personal matters. It won't happen again." Harriet's stern expression softened. "I've known you for 15 years, since you were a hotshot resident terrifying the nursing staff with your perfectionism. You've never let personal matters affect your work. Whatever's happening must be significant." Elena hesitated, then made a decision. "Harriet, you worked in San Diego before coming to Chicago, right? UC San Diego Medical Center, late 90s through 2005. Did you ever encounter mental health advocacy work by someone named Isabella Reyes?" Harriet's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Isabella?" "Yes, actually. Remarkable young woman. Organized support. Groups for Latino families affected by mental illness, pushed for bilingual services." She tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" "She was my husband's sister. I only recently learned about her." Harriet's expression registered surprise, then understanding. "Ah, Marcus Reyes. I didn't make the connection. Different hospitals, different specialties. Isabella was treated at the psychiatric center while I was in cardiology." She hesitated. "Her case was complicated. Bipolar I with psychotic features. She did incredibly well for periods, then would suffer devastating episodes. She died young," Elena said quietly. Harriet nodded. "A tragedy. She stopped taking her medication, common with bipolar disorder, especially during manic phases when patients feel invincible. Developed severe side effects when she restarted too quickly. Multiple organ failure." She paused. "Marcus never mentioned his sister to you?" "Never. In 10 years of marriage." Harriet considered this. "Grief manifests in strange ways, Elena. Some people need to talk about their lost loved ones constantly. Others can't bear to speak their names." She touched Elena's arm gently. "But secrets between spouses have a way of surfacing eventually, better on your terms than by accident." Elena spent the rest of her shift moving mechanically through her duties, her mind miles away. The cardiothoracic surgeon in her knew that even healthy-appearing hearts could harbor hidden defects, aneurysms waiting to rupture, valves slowly stiffening toward failure. Perhaps marriages were no different. That evening, Elena called Camilla for advice. Her sister had always been her emotional compass when Eleanor's analytical mind led her in circles. "You need to talk to him," Camilla said definitively after hearing the story. Not an accusation, but an invitation to share. What if he gets defensive about me investigating behind his back? Then you acknowledge it wasn't ideal, but that you were trying to understand, not attack. Elena, this isn't about who's right. It's about something painful he hasn't been able to share. Why wouldn't he tell me about his own sister? We've discussed having children. What if mental illness runs in his family? Camilla sighed. Maybe that's exactly why he hasn't told you. Fear, shame, guilt, all possibilities. But you won't know until you create space for him to explain. After hanging up, Elena made a decision. She would confront Marcus, not with anger or accusations, but with an opening for truth. She typed out a text. Can you come home early tonight? I need to talk to you about something important. His response came quickly. Everything okay? Should I be worried? Elena stared at the screen, uncertain how to answer. Finally, she typed, not worried, just important. Please come home when you can. 3 dots appeared as he typed, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, leaving soon. Love you. Elena took a deep breath and began preparing for the conversation that would either deepen their marriage or reveal its foundations had been built on sand all along. Elena prepared for Marcus's return with the same methodical attention. She brought to complex surgeries. She cleared the dining room table of clutter, set out 2 glasses of water. Alcohol would only complicate an already emotional conversation, and placed the scanned copy of Isabella's photograph in front of Marcus's chair. She wanted the evidence, visible immediately. No room for denial, no opportunity for deflection. When Marcus's key turned in the lock, she was seated at the table, hands folded, heart racing despite her outward calm. He entered with a bouquet of white lilies, her favorites, concern etched across his features. You sounded serious, so I... His voice trailed off as he noticed the formal setting, then the photograph. The lilies dropped from his hand. For a moment neither spoke. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, eyes fixed on Isabella's image, color draining from his face. Then, with surprising gentleness, "Where did you find this?" "In your wallet," Elena answered, keeping her voice steady. 3 days ago, when I was looking for your insurance card before the anniversary party. Marcus moved slowly to the table, picking up the photograph with trembling fingers. "Not the original," he observed. "I scanned it. The original is still in your wallet." He nodded, sinking into the chair across from her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Her name was Isabella," Elena finally said. "She was your sister. She died in 2003 from complications related to bipolar disorder." Marcus looked up sharply. "You investigated me?" "I investigated a mystery," Elena corrected. "A significant person in your past who you've never mentioned in 10 years of marriage." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Elena recognized from times of extreme stress. "Who told you about her?" "Multiple sources." "Your mother confirmed. She existed but said the story was yours to tell. Sophia helped me find public records, and coincidentally, Harriet Levinson worked at the same hospital in San Diego where Isabella was treated." "Quite the thorough investigation, Dr. Reyes," Marcus said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Elena leaned forward. "I'm a surgeon, Marcus. When I see something unexpected, I gather information before acting. I needed to understand before confronting you. And do you understand? I understand that you had a sister who suffered from mental illness and died young. What I don't understand is why you've kept her existence secret from me for our entire relationship." Marcus closed his eyes, fingers still tracing the edges of the photograph. When he opened them again, they were filled with a pain Elena had never seen before, raw and ancient, like looking into an old wound that had never properly healed. "I haven't spoken Isabella's name aloud in nearly 20 years, he said quietly, "not to anyone who didn't already know her." not even to your wife, especially not to you." Seeing her expression, he added quickly, "Not because I didn't trust you, because I couldn't bear to bring that darkness into what we have." Elena felt her medical training kick in, the instinct to remain calm when receiving difficult information. "Tell me about her, please." Marcus took a deep breath, as if preparing to lift something enormously heavy. "Isabella was 13 when I was born, more like a second mother than a sister. My parents both worked long hours, so she often took care of me, helped with homework, made dinner, braided friendship bracelets for my wrist so I wouldn't feel lonely at school." His voice softened with memory. "She was brilliant, taught herself English from books, then taught me. Got a full scholarship to UC San Diego to study psychology. She wanted to be a therapist." "When did she get sick?" Elena asked gently. The signs were always there, looking back. Periods of incredible energy and creativity, followed by darker days. But the first major episode happened her sophomore year of college. She stopped sleeping, started talking about cosmic connections only. She could see. Called me at 3 a.m. to explain theories about numbers controlling human behavior. Marcus paused, swallowing hard. Then she disappeared for 3 days. Police found her walking along the highway, dehydrated, convinced she was receiving messages from passing cars. Elena nodded, understanding the clinical progression. The first manic episode often leads to diagnosis. She was hospitalized, diagnosed with bipolar I, started on lithium. It helped for a while. She managed to finish her degree, even started graduate school. A sad smile crossed his face. Isabella was determined not to let her diagnosis define her. She became an advocate, started support groups for Latino families dealing with mental illness, fought against stigma. "That's when Harriet knew her," Elena said. She described Isabella as remarkable. Marcus looked surprised, then pleased. She was. Even with everything she was dealing with, she helped so many people. "What happened?" Elena asked, though she already knew the clinical outcome. Marcus's expression darkened. "The pattern that destroys so many people with bipolar disorder. She'd stabilize on medication, feel better, think she didn't need it anymore, stop taking it. The cycle repeated for years, each episode worse than the last." He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "I was just finishing college when she had her final episode. She'd been stable for almost 2 years. Her longest stretch was working as a counselor, dating someone seriously. Then she decided to taper off her medication without telling her doctor." Eleanor recognized the dangerous scenario, and when symptoms returned, she tried to restart at the previous dose. Marcus nodded. "Severe lithium toxicity. By the time she got to the hospital, her kidneys were failing. Multiple organ systems followed." His voice broke. "I was there at the end. She had moments of lucidity between the seizures, kept apologizing to me, to our parents. Her last coherent words were, 'Don't let this shadow follow you, hermanito. Live in the light.'" Elena rose, instinctively moving toward him, but he held. "Upper hand, not ready for comfort. After she died, I couldn't function. Deferred my job offers. Moved back home. For months, I just existed. Then one day, I remembered what she'd taught me about computer games when I was struggling with reading, how breaking information into smaller pieces made it manageable for me. That's when I started developing the first version of the software. Your company came from her influence," Elena realized. "Everything good in my life came from her," Marcus said, "including indirectly you." "What do you mean?" "When we met at that hospital fundraiser, I was only there because the pediatric neurologist reminded me of something Isabella once said about helping children before stigma sets in. If not for her, I might never have developed the software, never been at that event, never met you." Elena absorbed this, understanding flooding through her. "So why keep her a secret from me, from everyone?" Marcus finally turned to face her. After Isabella died, I watched what grief did to my parents. My father retreated into silence. My mother became obsessively protective of me, terrified I might develop the same condition. Our family fractured around her absence. He returned to the table, sitting heavily. When I met you, I was finally building something new, something good. I'd kept Isabella's memory sealed away for so long that bringing her into our relationship felt impossible. The longer I went without telling you, the harder it became to find the right moment. But carrying her photograph every day, Elena said softly, that doesn't sound like someone trying to forget. I never wanted to forget her, Marcus clarified. I wanted to forget what her illness did to her, to our family. I carry her picture, to remember her smile, her kindness, not the hospital beds and seizures. Were you ever going to tell me? Elena asked, the question that had been burning inside her since discovering the photograph. Marcus looked down at his hands. I told myself I would eventually, when it felt safe, when I was sure it wouldn't change how you saw me. Change how I saw you? Elena echoed, confused. Elena, you're precise, methodical, perfectly controlled. You plan everything, our vacations, our finances. Even when we first discussed having children, you wanted genetic counseling first. Understanding dawned. You thought I wouldn't want children with you if I knew mental illness ran in your family. Marcus didn't deny it. The thought was always there. What if our child inherited the same condition? What if you decided that was too great a risk? That's not fair, Marcus. You didn't give me the chance to have that conversation with you, to make that decision together. I know, he admitted, it was wrong. But fear isn't rational, Elena. I've watched what this illness can do. The thought of potentially passing it on, of watching our child suffer like Isabella did. His voice broke. Elena reached across the table, finally taking his hand. You should have trusted me. With your fear, your grief, all of it. I trusted you with everything else, he said quietly, just not this. And I've wanted to tell you so many times, when we discussed starting a family, when you shared your own family's medical history. But it was like Isabella existed in a different dimension of my life, one that never intersected with our marriage. Until now, Eleanor said. Until now, he agreed. They sat in silence, hands joined across the table, the photograph of Isabella between them. Elena thought about the secret Marcus had carried alone for years, not an affair, not a betrayal in the conventional sense, but a wound he'd never allowed to heal properly. I need you to understand something, Elena finally said. I'm hurt that you kept this from me, not because of what it might mean for our future children, but because you suffered alone when you didn't have to. Marriage means sharing burdens, Marcus, even the ones that existed before we met. Marcus looked up, relief and residual fear mingling in his expression. Where does this leave us? Elena considered the question carefully. As a surgeon, she knew that some injuries required immediate intervention, while others needed time and space to heal properly. This revelation wasn't a clean surgical cut, but a complex wound with layers of scar tissue built up over decades. It leaves us with work to do, she answered honestly. You've kept part of yourself separate from our marriage for 10 years. That can't be fixed in one conversation. He nodded, accepting her assessment. And Isabella? Do you want to know more about her? For the first time that evening, Elena smiled. I want to know everything about her. She's part of you, which means she's part of us. She deserves to exist in our home, in our conversations, not just in a hidden photograph. Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but Elena recognized them as different from the pained ones before. These held relief, perhaps even hope. I think she would have loved you, he said softly. Tell me why, Eleanor encouraged, making space for the beginning of a new conversation, one that would gradually bring Isabella from the shadows into the light of their shared life. In the days that followed their confrontation, A new rhythm emerged in the Reyes household. Each evening, Marcus would share another piece of Isabella with Elena, small stories that painted a portrait of the sister he'd loved and lost. He showed her the contents of the fireproof safe, Isabella's college essays, newspaper clippings, of her advocacy work, birthday cards she'd made for him with intricate drawings and inside jokes. "She taught me to ride a bike," he told Elena one night as they sat on their porch swing. "My father was working double shifts, and my mother was afraid I'd hurt myself. Isabella just said, 'The kid needs to fall a few times to learn.' She was right." Elena listened, absorbing each detail, asking questions when appropriate, but mostly creating space for Marcus to speak his sister's name aloud after decades of silence. She was building a relationship with Isabella posthumously, understanding how this woman had shaped the man she'd married. But as a surgeon accustomed to thoroughness, Eleanor knew there were still pieces missing. Medical details that Marcus either didn't know or couldn't bring himself to discuss. Understanding Isabella's condition fully meant understanding what Marcus truly feared. "I'd like to learn more about her medical history," Eleanor said carefully over breakfast, 2 weeks after their initial conversation. Not just for potential hereditary concerns, but to understand what she experienced. Marcus tensed slightly. "Her medical records would be sealed. I'm not suggesting we access her private records. But perhaps your parents might have information they've never shared with you. Sometimes families shield the person closest to the patient from the most difficult details." He considered this. "My father rarely speaks about her illness. My mother might know more, but—" He hesitated. "But you're afraid to reopen old wounds," Elena finished for him. "For all of us," he admitted. Elena reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Wounds that never fully heal are the most dangerous kind, Marcus. In medicine, we call them chronic wounds. They drain the body's resources, become sites for infection, and can ultimately threaten the entire system." He recognized the metaphor. "And you think our family has a chronic wound?" "I think Isabella's memory deserves better than to be treated as a family secret. And I think you deserve to understand what happened to her fully." That weekend, they drove to Roberto and Lucia's home together. Elena had called ahead, explaining their purpose without details, giving Marcus's parents time to prepare emotionally. When they arrived, Lucia had prepared lunch, but the tension in the house was palpable. Roberto embraced his son longer than usual, his normally stoic expression softened with concern. Over empanadas and arroz con pollo, they exchanged pleasantries, discussing work projects and neighborhood news. Only when Lucia brought out coffee did Marcus finally broach the subject. "Elena knows about Isabella," he said simply. "I want to tell her everything." Roberto and Lucia exchanged glances, a silent conversation born of decades together. "Everything?" Lucia asked carefully. "The medical details, the genetic considerations," Marcus clarified. "We're considering starting a family soon. We need to understand the risks." At the mention of grandchildren, Lucia's expression shifted from concern to a complex mixture of hope and fear. She rose and left the room without speaking, returning moments later with a worn accordion file. "I kept all of it," she said, placing it on the table. "Her diagnosis, paperwork, treatment plans, research articles I collected over the years. The doctors called me obsessive, but I needed to understand what was happening to my daughter." Elena recognized the behavior immediately, the parent as medical researcher, seeking control through information in an uncontrollable situation. She'd seen it countless times in parents of her pediatric patients. Roberto placed a hand on the file. "There are things in here we have never discussed as a family. Things that happened when you were too young to understand, Marcus." "I'm not too young anymore," Marcus said quietly. "And I need to know." Lucia nodded, then began to speak. her voice taking on the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed difficult words many times without saying them aloud. Isabella's condition was complicated by several factors. The doctors initially diagnosed her with bipolar disorder, but later suspected a form called schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. Her symptoms included both mood disturbances and occasional breaks from reality. Elena nodded, understanding the distinction. Marcus looked surprised. "I never knew that part." "We protected you from the worst episodes," Roberto said. "When she believed she was being followed, when she couldn't distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. There's more," Lucia continued, opening the file and removing a genetic testing report. After her third hospitalization, they did genetic testing. Isabella had several gene variants associated with both bipolar disorder and schizophrenia spectrum conditions. The doctor explained it as a high genetic loading, many small genetic factors that together created vulnerability. Marcus stared at the report, though the technical language would have been difficult for him to pass. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because of what happened next," Lucia said, her voice breaking slightly. "They recommended genetic testing for immediate family members. Your father and I were tested." She removed another paper from the file, handing it to Marcus. "I carry 2 of the same variants. Your father carries a different one." The genetic counselor explained that this gave siblings of Isabella approximately a 13–18% chance of developing a similar condition compared to about 1% in the general population. Elena watched understanding dawn on Marcus's face. "You had me tested," Roberto nodded, "when you were 16, after your sister died." "Without telling me," Marcus said, an edge entering his voice. "You were a minor," Lucia defended. "You were already struggling with her loss. We thought it would be better for you not to worry if the results were negative." "And they were negative?" Eleanor asked, medical training overriding her reluctance to interrupt this family moment. Lucia hesitated, looking at Roberto. He nodded slightly, giving permission. "Not entirely," Lucia admitted. "You carry one variant, Marcus, one that has a modest association with bipolar disorder. The genetic counselor said it might slightly increase risk, but was far from deterministic. Many people with this variant never develop any symptoms." Marcus sat back in his chair, absorbing this information. "So you knew I had this genetic marker, and you never told me. You let me believe there was nothing to worry about." "Because there wasn't," Roberto insisted. "You showed no signs of mood disorder, even during adolescence when symptoms often emerge. The doctor said after age 25, your risk would decrease significantly. But for my children," Marcus asked, finally articulating the fear that had kept Isabella a secret for so long, "what would this mean for them?" Elena gently took the genetic report, scanning it with professional eyes. "These specific variants have been better understood since this testing was done. Current research suggests the heritability is complex, not a simple yes or no like with some genetic conditions." She looked up at Marcus. "It means there's a slightly elevated risk compared to the general population, but not dramatically so, especially with only one variant. And more importantly, treatment options have improved significantly since Isabella's time." Lucia reached across the table, taking Marcus's hand. "We made mistakes, Hijo. We thought we were protecting you by not burdening you with this information, but fear and secrecy only created distance between us." "The same mistake I made with Elena," Marcus acknowledged, the anger in his voice softening. "I kept Isabella secret to avoid confronting this very conversation." Roberto, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke. "Isabella would have hated how we've all handled this. She fought against shame and stigma. She believed in talking openly about mental health, especially in our community. The four of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 decades of protective secrets filling the space between them. Finally, Elena spoke. In medicine, we often talk about genetic predisposition as loading a gun, but environmental factors as pulling the trigger. Even with genetic vulnerabilities, many people never develop symptoms because they don't encounter the environmental stressors that activate those vulnerabilities. She turned to Marcus. Whatever small genetic risk exists, we can work with genetic counselors to understand it fully. But more importantly, we can make sure our children grow up in an environment that promotes mental wellness, open communication, reduce stigma, early intervention if needed. Marcus looked at her, then at his parents, his expression clearing slightly. So we don't pretend Isabella never existed. We honor her memory by learning from what happened. Exactly, Elena said. And we break the cycle of secrecy that has haunted your family for 20 years. That evening, driving back from his parents' house, Marcus and Elena maintained a thoughtful silence. The accordion file sat on the back seat, like an additional passenger, the physical manifestation of decades of unspoken family history. "I'd like some time to process everything," Marcus finally said as they neared their neighborhood. "It's a lot to absorb." Eleanor nodded. "Of course, but not alone," he added, glancing at her. "Not anymore." The simple statement marked a profound shift. For 20 years, Marcus had processed his grief and fear in isolation. Now he was choosing a different path. At home, they settled in their living room, the file contents spread across the coffee table. Marcus studied his genetic test results, while Elena reviewed Isabella's treatment history. The medication protocols were different then, Elena observed. They hadn't developed some of the mood stabilizers we use now, and the genetic testing was rudimentary compared to current standards. Marcus set down his report. "Does it bother you, learning that this condition runs in my family?" Elena considered the question carefully. "As a doctor, I understand the genetic component is just one factor among many. As your wife," she paused, "what bothers me is that you carried this fear alone when we could have faced it together years ago." "I thought I was protecting you and us," Marcus admitted, "but I was really protecting myself from having this conversation. From potentially being rejected," Elena clarified, seeing the deeper fear. "Yes," he met her eyes directly. "My greatest fear wasn't actually passing something on to our children. It was losing you if you knew the whole truth." Eleanor moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "That's what hurts most, Marcus. After 10 years, you still didn't trust that I would love all of you, including your family history, including Isabella, including any genetic predispositions. It wasn't rational," he acknowledged, "but fear rarely is." "No," Elena agreed, "especially fear born from trauma. Watching your sister suffer, losing her so young, that's traumatic, and trauma distorts our thinking in ways we often don't recognize." Marcus picked up a photograph of Isabella from her college graduation, her smile radiant. "I've spent 20 years trying not to think about her decline, focusing only on the good memories, but that means I've never really processed what happened." "It's a common response," Elena said gently. "As a surgeon, I see families do this with terminal illnesses. They focus on the person before the disease, as if separating the two somehow preserves the real person in memory. But Isabella's illness was part of her," Marcus said slowly, a new realization forming. Her advocacy work, her compassion for others struggling with mental health, those came from her personal experience. By trying to forget her illness, I've been diminishing what made her remarkable." Elena nodded. "Just as keeping her separate from our marriage diminished an important part of what made you who you are." They stayed up late into the night. Marcus sharing memories he'd suppressed for years, both beautiful and painful ones. He described Isabella's creative bursts during manic phases, when she would paint murals across her apartment walls or write poetry for days without sleeping. He recalled the darker periods when she would disappear into herself, when the family would walk on eggshells around her deepening depression. The hardest part was the unpredictability, he confessed. Never knowing which Isabella would be present, from one day to the next. As a doctor, Elena understood the clinical reality behind his descriptions. As a wife, she heard the lingering trauma in his voice, the child's confusion, the young adult's helplessness, the lingering fear that had shaped his adult decisions. "I want to show you something," Elena said, retrieving her laptop. She opened a presentation she'd given at a medical conference the previous year. "This is research on family-focused therapy for bipolar disorder. Studies show that when families understand the condition and learn specific communication strategies, patient outcomes improve dramatically." Marcus watched as she explained the latest treatment approaches, the early intervention strategies, the success rates of combined medication and therapy. "You're saying that if Isabella had gotten sick today rather than 20 years ago, the outcome might have been different," he observed. "Potentially, yes. Mental health treatment has evolved significantly, and the genetic understanding has improved as well." She switched to a different paper. "Current research suggests that for conditions like bipolar disorder, genetics account for about 60–80% of risk, but environmental factors, stress, trauma, substance use play a crucial role in whether those genetic vulnerabilities manifest as actual symptoms. So, even if our child inherited my genetic variant, it wouldn't guarantee they would develop the condition," Elena finished. "And, more importantly, we would know what to watch for. Early intervention makes an enormous difference in outcomes." Marcus was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "I spent so many years afraid of a conversation we're having right now, and it's actually comforting." "Knowledge usually is," Elena said, squeezing his hand. "It's fear of the unknown that paralyzes us." The next morning, Elena called in to reschedule her surgeries, something she had done only twice in her entire career. She and Marcus spent the day continuing their conversation, expanding it beyond Isabella to the future they wanted to build together. "I think we should meet with a genetic counselor," Marcus suggested. "Get updated testing with current technology." "A good first step," Eleanor agreed. "But I also think you might benefit from talking with a therapist who specializes in grief and family trauma. Not because there's anything wrong," she added quickly, seeing his expression, "but because you've carried this alone for so long." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I've spent 20 years trying not to think about certain aspects of Isabella's life and death. That hasn't served me well." "Or us," Elena added gently. "No, or us," he acknowledged. By evening they had drafted what Elena jokingly called their treatment plan, a list of practical steps forward. Genetic counseling for both of them, therapy for Marcus to address unresolved grief, a visit to San Diego, where they would visit Isabella's grave together for the first time, and most significantly, a family dinner where they would bring Isabella back into family conversations, not as a sad secret, but as a beloved family member worth remembering fully. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, disappearing into his office. He returned with a small wooden box, beautifully carved with sunflowers, Isabella's favorite. "I've kept these hidden in my office. I think they belong in our home now." Inside were more photographs of Isabella at various ages, the friendship bracelets she had made for Marcus as a child, a journal of poetry she had written during her college years, treasures of a life that had remained concealed for too long. "These shouldn't be locked away anymore," Elena agreed. "They're part of our family history." Marcus selected a particularly beautiful photograph of Isabella, not the one from his wallet, but one where she stood before a mural she had painted during a community arts project. Her expression was peaceful, confident, a woman in her element. "I'd like to frame this for our living room," he said, "so she's present in our daily lives, not hidden away." "I think that's perfect," Elena said. The photograph would become the first visible acknowledgement of Isabella in their home, a physical symbol of the walls breaking down between Marcus's past and their shared present. Later that night, lying in bed together, Elena felt Marcus turn toward her in the darkness. "You asked me once if I was ever going to tell you about Isabella," he said quietly. "The truth is, I don't know. I might have continued keeping that part of myself separate forever." "And now?" Elena asked. "Now I understand what I've lost by doing that. Not just the chance to share Isabella with you, but the chance to be fully known." He took her hand. "Thank you for not letting me hide anymore." "That's what love is," Elena said simply. "Seeing all of someone, even the parts they try to conceal, and choosing them anyway, even the messy genetic parts." He attempted humor, but vulnerability underlay the question. "Especially those," she assured him. "After all, I'm a surgeon. I've always been comfortable with human imperfection." For the first time since discovering the photograph, Elena felt the distance between them truly begin to close. The mystery that had briefly threatened their marriage was transforming into something else entirely, a deeper understanding, a more honest foundation, a shared commitment to bringing light to what had been kept in darkness. 6 months later, Elena stood in the surgery department's conference room, completing her presentation to the hospital's medical staff. The audience of surgeons, psychiatrists, and support staff listened intently as she concluded. In summary, integrated care between surgical departments and mental health services isn't just beneficial, it's essential. When we treat the whole patient, not just the organ system requiring intervention, outcomes improve across all measures. Dr. Harriet Levinson nodded approvingly from the front row. After the applause, and as colleagues filtered out, she approached Elena. "Quite a shift in your research focus," Harriet observed. "I've always known you as strictly cardiothoracic." Elena smiled. "Let's say I've developed a more holistic perspective recently. Does this have anything to do with your conversation about Isabella Reyes last year?" "It has everything to do with that," Elena admitted. "Learning about her changed how I think about patient care. Medical histories aren't just data points. They're family stories with ripple effects across generations." Harriet squeezed her arm affectionately. "Some of our most important medical insights come from our personal experiences. I'm glad something positive has emerged from that difficult history." Elena gathered her materials, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The photograph that had initially threatened her marriage had ultimately transformed it, along with her professional outlook. The crisis had evolved into opportunity, painful but ultimately regenerative, like the necessary inflammation that precedes healing. When Eleanor arrived home that evening, she found Marcus in the newly converted home office they now shared. After years of maintaining separate workspaces, they had redesigned the room to accommodate both their needs, her medical journals alongside his software specifications, a testament to their new commitment to integration rather than compartmentalization. "How did the presentation go?" he asked, looking up from his computer. "Very well. The hospital is implementing the screening protocol next month." She surveyed the room, noting the framed photographs now prominently displayed. Their wedding day, Elena's medical school graduation, Marcus with his parents, and Isabella's vibrant smile from the community mural project. "I heard from Dr. Chen today," Marcus said, referring to their genetic counselor. "The expanded panel results are ready for review next week. Elena nodded, feeling surprisingly calm about the appointment. Whatever the results showed, they would face it together with complete information rather than fear-driven speculation. I also had a good session with Dr. Michaels, Marcus continued, mentioning his therapist. We discussed how keeping Isabella secret affected my ability to be vulnerable in other areas of our relationship. Any insights? Elena asked, settling into the armchair beside his desk. Many, he said with a rueful smile. Apparently, when you compartmentalize grief, you end up compartmentalizing other emotions too. He thinks that's why I've always struggled to express frustration or disappointment, not just about Isabella, but about anything. Eleanor considered this. That fits with patterns I've observed. You tend to withdraw rather than discuss problems directly. Defense mechanism, Marcus acknowledged. If I don't express negative feelings, I don't risk rejection for having them. And we know where that leads, Elena said gently, to hidden photographs and separate lives within a marriage. He nodded, reaching for her hand. No more of that. The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Elena checked her watch and stood. That must be your parents. Since their discovery of Isabella's genetic reports, Sunday dinner with Roberto and Lucia had become a monthly tradition, part of healing the family's chronic wound. Initially awkward, these gatherings had gradually evolved into something meaningful as they all learned to speak honestly about the past. Lucia arrived bearing containers of homemade chile rellenos and flan. Roberto followed with a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Found this while organizing the garage, he explained, as they settled in the living room. Thought you might want it. Marcus unwrapped the package to reveal a cassette tape labeled Isabella, Songs for Marcus, 1997. Her mixtape, he said quietly, running his finger over the handwritten label. I thought this was lost years ago. It was in a box of her things I couldn't bear to go through after. Lucia's voice trailed off. But it's time these memories come back into the light. We can digitize this, Eleanor suggested, seeing Marcus's emotional reaction. Preserve it before the tape deteriorates. Over dinner, the conversation moved naturally between present concerns and memories of Isabella. The awkward silences that had characterized their early family dinners had given way to a more natural flow, where Isabella could be mentioned without hushed tones or pained expressions. She would have turned 50 next month, Lucia observed, as they shared dessert. I wonder what she would have become. Still an advocate, I think, Marcus said, but with a podcast instead of community flyers. She always adapted to new technologies quickly. She would have loved your software, Roberto added, especially knowing it came from her techniques for helping you read. And she would have adored Elena, Lucia said warmly, another brilliant, determined woman in the family. After his parents left, Marcus and Elena sat on their porch swing, a new addition that had become their favorite spot for important conversations. The spring evening was cool, but pleasant, neighborhood children still playing on bikes in the lingering daylight. I've been thinking, Marcus said, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. About children. Eleanor looked up at him. They had put family, planning discussions on hold during the tumultuous months of revelation and healing, focusing instead on strengthening their marriage foundation. What about them? She asked carefully. I think I'm ready to revisit that conversation, not with fear this time, but with perspective. Elena considered his words. The genetic counseling results aren't in yet. I know, and they matter. But they don't define us or our future children. He gazed out at the children playing in the twilight. Watching my parents tonight, I realized something. Despite everything, Isabella's illness, the secrecy, the mistakes they made trying to protect me, they still created a family filled with love. Imperfect, complicated love, but love nonetheless. They did, Elena agreed. That's what matters most, isn't it? Not perfect genes or flawless family histories, but commitment to loving each other through whatever comes. Elena thought about her. Years as a surgeon, the countless families she'd seen faced devastating diagnoses with their children. What differentiated those who emerged stronger from those who shattered wasn't the severity of the medical challenge, but the quality of their bonds before crisis struck. "Yes," she said simply, "that's precisely what matters." "So, Dr. Reyes," Marcus said, a hint of his old playfulness returning, "scientifically speaking, do you think we'd make good parents?" Elena smiled, leaning into him. "The empirical evidence suggests we've developed excellent communication skills, demonstrated resilience under stress, and shown capacity for growth through adversity. All positive indicators for parental success. Is that your professional opinion?" "No," she said, turning to kiss him softly. "That's my personal one." Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Elena noticed Marcus studying the framed photo of Isabella in their bedroom, a recent addition to their most private space. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "About parallel lives," he replied. "If we had discovered Isabella's photograph under different circumstances, if you had confronted me immediately with anger or accusations, if I had denied or deflected, we might be in a very different place now." "True," Elena acknowledged, "but that's not what happened. Because you approached the mystery as a surgeon rather than a betrayed wife. You gathered information, sought understanding before judgment." He turned to face her. "Not many people would have done that." Elena considered this. Maybe, or maybe the photograph itself told me something important, that this wasn't about another woman in the conventional sense, but about something deeper. The way you kept it, protected it all these years, that spoke of loss, not betrayal. "Still," Marcus said, "you chose the harder path, seeking truth rather than confirmation of fears. That choice changed everything." Elena thought about the surgical principle that had guided her career. Proper diagnosis must precede intervention. In their marriage, she had applied the same discipline, resisting the impulse to react before understanding fully. "We both made choices that led us here," she said. "You could have continued denying, deflecting. Instead, you finally let Isabella's story be told." "Our story now," Marcus corrected. "Not just mine or my family's, but ours." Elena nodded, understanding the profound shift this represented. The photograph that had initially seemed to reveal a division in their marriage had ultimately eliminated the last barrier between them. Isabella's memory, once carefully segregated from their relationship, now permeated it, not as an intrusion, but as an enrichment, a deepening of context that made their connection more meaningful. "I think that's what marriage truly is," Elena reflected. "Not the absence of secrets or struggles, but the gradual process of bringing them into the light together, the willingness to keep turning toward each other, especially when it would be easier to turn away." Marcus drew her close. "From separate lives to a shared one, even the difficult parts." "Especially those," Elena said, echoing her words from months earlier. "They're what make our story unique." As they drifted toward sleep, Elena thought about the journey that had begun with a hidden photograph. What had initially seemed like a potential ending had become instead a new beginning, not just for their marriage, but for an entire family's relationship with its past. The truth, finally acknowledged, had indeed changed their marriage forever, not by destroying it, but by deepening it, strengthening it in precisely the places where it had once been most vulnerable. 2 years later, Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter, slicing fruit for breakfast while half listening to the morning news. Through the window, she could see Marcus in the backyard, pushing their 1-year-old daughter Isabella on the infant swing they'd installed last month. The baby's delighted giggles floated through the open window each time the swing reached its apex. Elena smiled, watching them. They had chosen the name deliberately, not Isabella exactly, but a variation that honored Marcus's sister while giving their daughter her own identity. A connection to the past without being defined by it, as Marcus had put it. The genetic counseling they'd pursued had provided reassurance. While Marcus did carry one gene variant associated with bipolar disorder, their combined genetic profiles suggested a risk for their children only marginally higher than the general population. More importantly, the counselor had emphasized that knowledge and early intervention made profound differences in outcomes, even when genetic predispositions existed. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, they had approached the news with eyes wide open, informed, prepared, but not fearful. They had assembled the strongest support system possible, including mental health professionals who specialized in family systems and perinatal wellness. The microwave beeped, interrupting Elena's thoughts. She removed the steaming bottle of formula and tested its temperature against her wrist, another medical skill repurposed for motherhood. As she headed toward the backyard, her phone rang. Checking the caller ID, she saw it was Camilla. "Hey, sis," Elena answered, pushing the back door. Open with her shoulder. "How's my gorgeous niece?" Camilla asked without preamble. "Currently showing her father that she has no fear whatsoever," Elena replied, watching as Isabella stretched her hands toward the sky, demanding to go higher. "Takes after her mother," Camilla laughed. "Listen, I'm calling because I need a consult." Elena raised an eyebrow, handing the bottle to Marcus as he lifted Isabella from the swing. "Medical? No, ethical. The Women's Health Foundation I'm working with is planning a campaign on familial mental health disorders, specifically how mothers can support children and each other when these conditions run in families." Elena moved to the patio chair, understanding immediately why Camilla had called. Her sister continued, "I immediately thought of you and Marcus, how you navigated learning about Isabella, the genetic testing, your decision to have Isabella despite knowing there was a slight increased risk." "Camilla," Elena said cautiously, "that's a very personal story." "I know, and I would never suggest sharing it without your complete consent. But stories like yours, where families face these issues head-on with information rather than fear, could help so many people." Across the patio, Marcus caught Elena's eye, recognizing from her expression that something significant was being discussed. He nodded toward the baby, indicating he'd handle her breakfast while Elena continued her call. "What exactly are you proposing?" Elena asked. "Initially just a conversation with our content team, maybe eventually an interview. Anonymous, if you prefer, about the experience of discovering family mental health history during marriage and how it affected your family planning decisions." Elena considered this. For 2 years, Isabella's story had remained within their immediate family circle, no longer a secret, but still private. Making it public, even anonymously, represented another significant threshold. "Let me discuss it with Marcus," she said finally. "This isn't just my story to share." After the call ended, Elena joined Marcus and Isabella at the small patio table. Their daughter was contentedly drinking her bottle, one tiny hand wrapped around Marcus's finger, a grip that never failed to make Elena's heart constrict with love. "Camilla wants us to consider sharing our experience about Isabella," Elena explained, outlining her sister's request, "for a mental health awareness campaign aimed at families." Marcus was quiet for a moment, gently wiping formula from Isabella's chin. "What do you think?" he asked finally. "I think it could help other families facing similar situations," Elena said carefully, "especially those without medical backgrounds, to help them understand the genetic components." Marcus nodded slowly. "Isabella always said that silence around mental illness was its own kind of prison. She believed in speaking openly about her condition, even when it made others uncomfortable. I remember you telling me that," Elena said. It's one of the things that made her advocacy work so effective. If sharing our experience, how we moved from secrecy to openness, might help other families avoid the same mistakes. Marcus looked down at their daughter, who was now dozing against his chest. Isabella would have wanted that. Elena reached across the table, taking his free hand. We don't have to decide immediately, and we'd need parameters, how much to share, whether to use our real names. I want to do it, Marcus said, his decision seemingly crystallizing as he spoke, not anonymously. With our names, our story, Isabella's name. After spending 20 years trying to protect her memory by hiding it, I think it's time to honor it by sharing it. Eleanor studied him, noting the certainty in his expression. The man who had once hidden his sister's photograph now wanted to share her story publicly. It was perhaps the most profound measure of how far they had come. Are you sure? She asked. I am, he said, but it should be our story, not just mine or yours. How we discovered the photograph, how we navigated the truth together, how we decided to have Isabella. 3 months later, Elena stood in the wings of the auditorium at Chicago Memorial Hospital, watching as the audience filled the seats for the Women's Health Foundation's annual conference. The keynote panel, titled Family Mental Health, Breaking the Cycle of Silence, featured 3 couples, including Elena and Marcus. Nervous? Marcus asked, adjusting his tie beside her. A bit, Elena admitted. Operating on an infant's heart somehow feels less intimidating than sharing our personal story with 500 strangers. We've practiced, he reminded her. And, we're telling the truth, our truth. That's all we need to do. The moderator, a respected psychiatrist who specialized in family systems therapy, began by introducing the topic, how families often perpetuate cycles of silence around mental health conditions, and the impact this has across generations. When it was their turn to speak, Marcus began by showing the audience the photograph of Isabella that Elena had found in his wallet 3 years earlier. This is my sister, he said, his voice steady. For 20 years after her death, I carried her picture with me every day, but never spoke her name to the woman I married. This is the story of how that changed and why it matters. As they shared their journey, the discovery, the investigation, the painful truths, and ultimately the healing and decision to have Isabella, Elena observed the audience. People were leaning forward, some nodding in recognition, others wiping away tears. Several were taking notes. When they described naming their daughter in honor of Marcus's sister, a woman in the front row pressed her hand to her heart, visibly moved. During the Q&A session, a young couple approached the microphone. My husband was recently diagnosed with bipolar II disorder, the woman said. We've been discussing whether to have children, but the genetic component terrifies us. How did you move past the fear to make your decision? Eleanor looked at Marcus, silently asking who should answer. He nodded for her to proceed. We consulted with genetic counselors and mental health professionals, Elena explained. We educated ourselves about current understanding of heritability patterns and environmental factors, but ultimately the decision came down to this. We realized that living in fear of what might happen was already diminishing our lives. The possibility of passing on a genetic predisposition didn't outweigh the certainty of love and support we could provide. And the practical steps? The husband asked. Marcus leaned toward his microphone. We developed what we call our family wellness plan, regular check-ins with mental health professionals, even when things are going well, open age-appropriate discussions with our daughter as she grows, environmental modifications to reduce triggers like sleep disruption, and most importantly, a commitment to complete honesty, no stigma, no secrets. After the panel concluded, several attendees approached them privately, sharing their own family stories of mental illness kept secret across generations. One elderly woman grasped Elena's hands. My daughter died by suicide 26 years ago, she said quietly. Bipolar disorder, undiagnosed until it was too late. I've never spoken about it publicly. My other children still don't know the real cause of her death. Elena squeezed the woman's hands gently. It's never too late to break the silence, she said. As they drove home that evening, both were quiet, processing the emotional impact of sharing their stories so publicly. Do you think we helped anyone? Marcus finally asked. I know we did, Elena replied. That woman who lost her daughter, I gave her my contact information. She's going to meet with us to discuss how to tell her other children the truth after all these years. Marcus shook his head in wonder. 3 years ago, I couldn't even tell my wife about Isabella. Now we're helping strangers talk to their families. That's how healing works, Elena observed. Once you've navigated difficult terrain yourself, you can guide others through it. When they arrived home, Elena's parents were waiting with Isabella. The baby, now 14 months old, toddled toward them excitedly as they entered, her dark curls bouncing. "Mama! Dada!" she called, the words still new and thrilling on her tongue. Marcus scooped her up, tossing her gently toward the ceiling as she squealed with delight. Elena watched them, struck by how completely Marcus had shed the fear that once constrained him. Where he had once worried about genetic legacy, he now embraced fatherhood with uninhibited joy. Later that night, after Isabella was asleep, they sat in their customary place on the porch swing, the spring air carrying the scent of newly bloomed lilacs. I've been thinking, Marcus said, his arm around Elena's shoulders, about how differently things might have turned out. How so? If you had confronted me immediately about the photograph, he mused, if you had demanded answers in anger rather than investigating first, I would have been justified, Elena pointed out. Finding another woman's photograph in your husband's wallet, most wives would react emotionally. And I probably would have deflected, denied, minimized, Marcus acknowledged. My instinct was always to compartmentalize painful truths. So what made the difference? Elena asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on their journey. Marcus considered this. The way you approached it, like a diagnosis rather than an accusation. You created space for truth rather than demanding it. And once truth had space to exist between us, it became impossible to keep hiding it. Elena nodded, thinking about the surgical principle that had guided her. Proper examination before intervention. For me, she said slowly, the turning point was learning that the mystery wasn't what I initially feared. Once I suspected the photograph was family rather than romantic, I could approach you with curiosity instead of hurt, and I responded to that curiosity differently than I would have to confrontation, Marcus added. It's like we accidentally discovered a better way to handle potential marriage crises. Elena smiled at his characterization. Not entirely accidental. As a surgeon, I've learned that rushing to conclusions can be catastrophic. Careful investigation saves lives in the operating room. Apparently, it saves marriages too. Marcus chuckled. We should write a book. The surgical approach to marriage, diagnose before you operate. I'll stick to medical journals, Elena laughed, but there is wisdom there. So many relationships fracture because people react to their fears rather than investigating the actual situation. Like my parents did after Isabella died, Marcus observed. They feared what might happen to me, so they kept secrets they thought would protect me. Those secrets only created distance. And you did the same with me, Eleanor pointed out gently. A pattern repeated, Marcus agreed, until you broke it by choosing a different approach. The photograph that had once threatened their marriage now held a place of honor in their home, framed alongside family pictures in the living room, Isabella's vibrant smile a daily presence in their lives. The woman who had once existed only in Marcus's private memories had become part of their family narrative, her story neither hidden nor sanitized, but integrated into the honest history they were creating together. In Isabella's nursery, A small dream catcher hung above the crib, handmade by Lucia using beads that had once belonged to Isabella. To catch bad dreams before they take hold, Lucia had explained when presenting it, a poignant acknowledgement of her daughter's struggles and their family's new commitment to vigilance without fear. "Do you ever worry about Isabella's future?" Elena asked, voicing the question that occasionally still surfaced. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but not in the same paralyzing way I once did. I worry the normal amount that any parent worries, and I trust that whatever comes, we'll face it together, with all the knowledge and resources we have." That's the difference, Elena realized. Not the absence of concern, but the absence of secrecy around it. The willingness to acknowledge vulnerabilities instead of hiding them. Marcus nodded. Isabella used to say that mental illness was like any other chronic condition, manageable with proper treatment, catastrophic only when ignored or stigmatized. "Wise woman," Eleanor said. "I wish I could have known her." "In many ways, you do," Marcus replied. "Through me, through our daughter's name, through the choices we've made together. She's part of our family story now, not just my private memory." As night deepened around them, they continued rocking gently on the porch swing, the photograph in the living room visible through the window, a reminder of the strange winding path that had led them here. What had begun as a potential fracture in their marriage had ultimately become its strongest bond, transforming not just their relationship, but their entire approach to life's uncertainties. The strange woman's photograph had indeed changed their marriage forever, not by ending it, but by deepening it beyond what either could have imagined on that fateful day when Elena first discovered it hidden in Marcus's wallet.